Welcome to Sam's Russian Adventures. Today is the 1st of April and April showers are starting. Just as I've gone outside to start making this video, it started to drizzle a little bit. It's going to be one of those months where it's really difficult to film, so I might be doing a lot of inside filming. But today, while it's still not throwing it down, I thought I'd make a video about things that Westerners, I'm going to say Americans mainly, and the reason I'm saying Americans is because in Russia, if you're a Westerner, you're an American until you prove otherwise, which is something that's really weird. You'll notice that in the comments, Russian people will say to me, oh, why doesn't this American go home, or oh, things are different in Russia to America, even though I'm blatantly not American. So in the eyes of a Russian, you're an American. And so this video are things that Americans don't get about Russians and Russia. Point number one is the schooling. In Russia, kids start school at 6 and 7 years old, and they attend that school all the way until they either go to college or university. And so you have the same classmates, you grow up with those same people your entire childhood. And so that makes that bond really strong. And then what this does is, because this bond is really strong, you stay friends with your childhood classmates for ages. We have an official day throughout the year, which is like the day or the weekend for meeting of old class friends. It's very windy today. This is our famous Golden Gate, but it's being refurbished and it's not very golden. The next thing that Americans and Brits and Canadians, and it seems everyone in Western Europe doesn't understand is, why do Russians have high fences in their houses? Now, I recently did a poll on Instagram to ask people who have a private house or are thinking of building a house, will they build a high fence? And if so, why? And the most popular answer was privacy. Russians are very private people. Perhaps they want to walk around on their plot of land naked, or they want to sunbathe naked, or they just want to relax and not worry about the neighbors seeing, about people walking down the street seeing what they're doing. So the most popular answer was privacy. The second answer was, it's just a way to mark the territory between what is essentially the road or land that anybody can walk on, and then land which is private. And then thirdly, for security. Now, security isn't as big a deal. They're not perhaps worried about people breaking into their house, but they want to maybe leave their bikes, leave some, possessions, maybe pushchair, children's toys, things like that behind the fence. And, this will prevent opportunistic thieves from just kind of walking past, seeing the opportunity and stealing things. Now, I know in the UK, in the US, typically the front garden is open and the back garden is the garden where you have a high fence. But this differs in Russia. The high fence is, well, surrounding the whole property. This is the drama theatre. Another thing that Americans and Westerners as a whole do not understand, and that is, in Russia, men go to the sauna, the Russian banya, naked. I know that this is not a thing in the US. Going to the sauna with your fellow men and being naked is just like a strange thing. Sometimes I'll put photos. I put a photo on my group the other day in Telegram, and people were like, what the hell is that? Some people were making the sign of being sick. Some people were saying, what is going on there? It looks really camp, but it's not. It's just Russian men naked together in the sauna. And Russian men are very relaxed about being naked around each other. They don't have this whole feeling of insecurity of being naked. It doesn't really matter what they look like, whether they're muscle men or fat. It doesn't make any difference. We don't have this feeling of insecurity, whereas quite often if a foreigner comes to the banya in Russia, they will wear shorts or they will keep their underwear on. And so when you go to a sauna or a banya, especially if it's a public one and you see like 100 men and there's one person there that's wearing their shorts or their underwear, the chances are that person's not going to be Russian. Now, I know that saunas in the US, especially in the 80s, were a place where homosexuals would go to, right? So I guess that you have that history of men being naked in the sauna together is strange. In the UK, typically the only saunas that people go to would be a sauna at the gym. And a sauna at the gym isn't really hot, it's not really a social thing. It's something you perhaps spend like 20 minutes in at the end of your, you know, gym session. But of course, nobody would go there naked. You know, you would go there with shorts on at least. A very interesting ventilation shaft, right? The next thing that is very strange for foreigners, for Americans, for Westerners about Russia and Russians is that Russians have two passports, an internal passport and an external passport. One's for traveling outside of Russia, the other one's for Russia. Essentially, the one for internally, it looks the same as a passport, it is a passport, but the photo is kind of stuck inside it. It's not really as professional as the one you use for traveling overseas. And that's the one you need to show if you're buying a car or driving to another place where you need to take your documents with you, another city or another location, purchasing a house, doing something legal, anything within inside the country, you need your internal passport. Kind of makes sense. But Americans and British people don't really understand this, because we only really look for your passport, right, at the moment when we think we're going to travel. It's like the day before, you think, oh blimey, where's the passport? I haven't used it for like a year. I'll look in my travel bag or look in my cupboard, because the passport isn't really a thing. If you're a foreigner in Russia, you're supposed to keep your documents on you at all times, and typically a lot of Russian men will keep their passports on them at all times. And this leads to the next point, which Americans find very strange, and in the UK we don't really have this at all, and this is man bags. Yeah, we don't just have handbags, we have man bags. And you'll see a lot of Russian men with a bag that's kind of like over their shoulder, and they'll keep inside their passport, their driving documents, their, you know, all their kind of cards, all of their things. It's like, it's a weird thing. Now, I've tried the man bag thing, but typically I'll forget the bag in random places and then think, oh my word, I've lost all my documents, and go searching around and hopefully find it. And so I've had a few near scares with this. But it can be difficult in Russia because you've got that internal passport. So if you're going somewhere, you need something, where do you put that passport, right? You put it in your pocket, okay, but what about in summer? In summer, you're just wearing your shorts, you haven't got any pockets. This is a huge problem in summer. Like, I can show you my wallet right now, and you'll see how thick it is, because I've got my passport inside, all my cards, all the things I need, my kind of certificates for my health insurance, for my tax, all of that stuff. It's all in my passport, all in my wallet. And so yes, Russian men have man bags, not handbags, but man bags. Look, we've got buildings like this, and then right opposite we've got this. The next thing that is difficult for Westerners and Americans to understand is the queuing system in Russia. The queuing system is something that you have to get used to very quickly, because of course if you go to somewhere where there's an obvious queue, right, you're standing at a checkout, that's one thing. But if you're in a post office, for example, it's cold outside and there's maybe 30 people inside the post office isn't long enough just to have one queue, and so you've got people everywhere. So what you need to do is you need to go inside and you need to ask who is last in the queue. Kto posledny? Who is last? And one person, he could be sitting anywhere around that post office, is going to say, yeah. And so you then say to that person, okay, ja za vas, okay? So that when someone else comes to the post office and says, who's last? Well, you know that you're after that person in front of you, and that person knows you were behind them. So if someone asks them, are you last in the queue? They'll say, no, no, no. So behind him is me, right? Following him is me. So everyone knows their place in the queue, because it can get confusing. Some person might think, oh, I've been standing here for 2 hours, the queue's crazy, let me go and get a drink and come back again. And he knows that he's following this next person, and he's spoken to that person and let them know that he's after them, and the person that came next knows that he's following him. And so it's a system that, it sounds like a pretty confusing system, but it actually works out really well because everybody knows their place in the queue. Now when it comes to queuing checkout in a supermarket, again the rules are a bit different, because in the Western world we have common courtesy, and common courtesy works like, well, you're behind that person in the queue in the checkout, and so therefore you know that that person's before you, right? Whereas in Russia there might be one checkout and there's 10 people in the line, okay, and then someone else, another checkout will open and another person will shout, this checkout is open now. Now in the UK, the person that is second in the first queue will go round to the other checkout. But in Russia, it doesn't work like that. Russia, the person who is last at that queue will leg it to the new queue and get to go out first. And so that person doesn't have a feeling of guilt, the fact that he kind of jumped the queue, really, right? He was last in the first queue and got to go first in the new queue. Russians don't have that feeling of guilt that, oh, you kind of jumped the queue, and you know, the whole chat and cut thing, where you, I've seen it on, what's the Curb Your Enthusiasm, where the guy pretends to see his friend, or the woman pretends to see her friend, and then she chats and cuts in the queue. In Russia, queuing isn't, it's different. You don't have that kind of feeling of guilt if you pushed in the queue. Whereas in the UK, in the US, we have that order, that common courtesy that your place in the queue is your place in the queue, and if you're back of the queue, you're not going to jump around to the next checkout in the new queue and go first. You should let the people before you go first, and I always do that. Typically I always do that, right? Because I'm used to the common courtesy rules of the UK, the etiquette of the UK. If I'm last in the queue, I won't run around to the new queue and go first. I'll say to the people in front of me, do you want to go around to that new queue before me, right? I guess sports is like this in some way. Imagine you win a penalty and your team wins the game, but it really wasn't a penalty. Now some sportsmen will say, it wasn't a penalty, I fell over myself, it's not fair to give a penalty and our team wins because of the penalty. Whereas other people will think, we won 1-0, we got a penalty, so what? You know, it's a game, we won, that's the most important thing. So I've seen this car, which is camouflage, but look what we've got on the back. Ha! So the next interesting one, and something that people don't understand, especially because in the UK we don't have this, in the US you don't have it either, is public toilets are often toilets that you have to pay for to use. Now I can imagine what it would be like if you really needed to do a poo and you legged it to the toilet and they said, well, you can't come inside, you've got to pay to go inside. Now it's usually a very small amount of money, but typically you can't pay with your card, so you need to have cash on you, and very rarely do you have any cash on you, you know, something like the equivalent of you know, 20 cents or something. But this payment allows them to pay somebody to look after the toilets and clean them. And so in a sense it makes sense, right, that you get a nice clean toilet to use and your payment goes towards the cleaning of the toilet and looking after the toilet, so you don't sit in a horrible public toilet. But we don't really have this in the UK, and so it can be very confusing, right? You run to the toilet and then you find out you've got to pay to go inside it. Now it makes sense, of course it 100% makes sense, but at the same time, if you haven't got any money on you, what do you do? It would be interesting to see if you could kind of find a way inside, right? Because what would you do really if you like had the worst diarrhea in the world and you needed to use that public toilet but you didn't have the money to go inside? So keeping on the theme of the toilet, often on the road in Russia, if you stop at a roadside pit stop or in a village pit stop, then the chances are that the toilet's simply going to be a hole in the floor and you've got to squat to use it. Now this is something that's being phased out, but when I first came here 20 years ago, this was everywhere. The main pit stop between Vladimir and Moscow that the bus would stop at had one toilet, and it was just a hole in the floor. And it's pretty horrible if you know, need to go for a poo and maybe you haven't got really strong legs, right, and you've got to squat and go for a horrible poo. It's not the nicest thing. Quite often they wouldn't have toilet paper. But this is something that's changing a lot now. so it's something you might not ever get to see. Hopefully you won't. It's an experience. It's almost like, you know, going in the forest, right? Except, you know, other people might have also been to the toilet and done a wee and missed, and so you've got to squat in a toilet where there's wee all over the place to do a poo, which is, it's not good. The next thing that foreigners, especially me, and I guess everyone, would find strange is that often in the past especially there were two prices for access to museums, to exhibitions, places like that, to churches. One price for foreigners and another price for Russians. Now, Russians have explained this to me by saying, well, Russians pay tax and therefore their tax goes towards the upkeep of these places and therefore they should go for a cheaper price. Whereas, I don't know, I think that kind of puts people off. I think if you go to Russia as a tourist, you get there and you find out that you've got to pay more than Russian people to go inside. It's kind of like two rules and makes you feel more like an outsider. So I don't really agree with this. You let me know what you think. Is it fair that if you're a Russian taxpayer, you should be able to go to museums and places like that cheaper? I don't think it's fair, but you let me know. So here it says Monomakh Letny Courtyard, summer courtyard, so it's a summer cafe. Not summer yet though. So the thing in Russia is that Russian men shake hands. Shaking hands is a way to greet people, which is done in lots of different countries, so it's completely normal. However, Russian women do not shake hands, and this is something that Western people can't get used to because they just don't understand, well, what's the difference? Why do women not shake hands and men shake hands? Now, because you're a Western man, the chances are that Russian women might shake hands with you. But if you're a Western woman, don't be surprised if Russian men shake hands with all the foreign men in your group and not with you. I think a lot of Western women, including my mum, they say, I don't get why this is. Do they not respect women? Is that why they don't want to shake our hands? Well, actually, the opposite is true. They respect women and therefore they don't want to shake women's hands. This lawn here reminds me of the UK or the US, what do you think? And this house possibly too. Russia has free healthcare. Now, this is a shock for Americans, right? Who have to pay crazy amounts of money if they don't have health insurance. And the prices of going to a hospital in the US are just shocking. Whereas in Russia, the healthcare is free. Now, you can also go private in Russia, but even private healthcare is so cheap. It's just like a nominal fee. If you want to go and see a doctor and you don't want to go to the polyclinic and you want to go to the private doctors, you're going to pay about $20 just to go visit the doctor. And obviously the quality is impeccable, the cleanliness, everything. So in Russia, the healthcare is, well, cheap or free. And this will surprise a lot of people in the UK, because in the UK you're taught the NHS. The NHS is the free healthcare of the world, right? That, you know, in the UK we have free healthcare. Well, we do in Russia. You probably forget that Russia was part of the Soviet Union, a socialist society, and in socialism everything was, well, pretty much free. I've walked past here before and filmed it, I remember, in another video, and it's interesting around this house here. Well, this house is amazing, right? But around this house here, it's like a swimming pool at the top, right? The next strange one for Americans especially is that Russians don't smile at strangers. They don't have that whole kind of chit chat, hi, how are you, how's it going, with strangers. That doesn't happen. The way a Russian person looks at smiling towards a stranger is, well, this is a stranger, I don't know him, why would I smile at him? There's even a saying that if you're smiling at someone you don't know for no reason, then you're either a fool or there's something wrong with you. And so that's how people differ in the UK with regards to their attitude towards strangers. In Russia, Russians feel that if they're going to smile, then the smile has to be genuine and for a particular reason. So if they're your friend, or if someone's done something nice to you, or you're glad about something, then you're going to smile. But smiling for no reason, it doesn't exist. And I know that Americans don't get this because Americans are so bubbly and talkative with strangers, and it's completely different here in Russia. Now that doesn't mean that Russian people are rude. It just means that Russian people are different in their initial behavior with people. But once a Russian person is your friend, then they're going to be completely different. The next point that Americans and Europeans don't get is how Russian drivers thank other drivers on the road. In the UK, if some other car lets you pass a road where there's only access for one car at the time, perhaps because cars are parked or something like that, in the UK you'll flash them or wave the hand to say thanks. In Russia, if you wave your hand, a lot of the time people will be like, I don't know that person, why is he waving at me? Or if you flash them, they'll think, what have I done wrong? Why is he flashing me? In Russia, the way to say thank you is to press your hazards. So that person will let you through just before you get to the end. You'll press your hazards, and that's your car saying thank you. It's the same thing with if a car's letting you, move into a space if you're trying to change lanes, right? You'll click your hazards to say thank you. You don't do the waving or the flashing. The flashing's, why are you flashing me? What's going on? And the waving is, I don't know you, you're not my friend. Neighbours will wave anyway, and so you don't know whether they're waving, saying thanks or what. But that differs to the UK, because in the UK you'll flash or wave. But a lot of the time, people won't put the hazards on, flash or wave. They'll just, you let them through, whatever. It's that same thing with common courtesy, right? Are you doing it to get a thank you, or are you doing it to be courteous? Russian people think, well, if you're being courteous, I don't have to thank you. If you're being courteous, why are you doing it? To get a thanks, or to genuinely be courteous? Whereas I kind of look at it the other way around. I think if you're being courteous to somebody, do something nice for someone, it's nice of them to thank you, right? The next thing that Europeans and Americans cannot understand about Russia is why education is so cheap. University prices are ridiculously cheap. You're talking, to go to university, a lot of people qualified to go to university free. A lot of people are going to pay $1,000, a couple of $1,000 for their university tuition. That is shocking when you compare that to places like the UK and the US, where if you decide to go to university, you take on that huge student debt that you then pay off throughout your lifetime. In Russia, it's the opposite. You do not take on loads of debt to go to university. You perhaps take on a little bit, but the difference is like night and day. In the US and in the UK, in some universities, the prices are just shocking, that really you're putting yourself in a huge hole of debt for your whole life. Something that all foreigners find strange about Russia is that in Russia we have loads of sort of family celebrations, whether it's a public holiday or something to do with a school where they're publicly thanking for the participants, or awarding awards to people, whether they've done a skiing competition or won a drawing a picture competition or anything like that. What they'll do is, when they have the award, they'll announce the winner to come up to the stage and they'll play a song. And typically that song will be a song with English lyrics that is very, very rude. And it's very interesting to hear this really, really rude song. Now, obviously, a lot of the people don't understand the lyrics, but two of the most popular songs that get played at these events, and Russians, and I actually ask the people that are running the events, I say, why are you playing that song? It's a bit crazy that you're playing that song. And two of the most popular songs are My Neck, My Back, and the lyrics go, my neck, my back, lick my something and my something else, right? If you know the song, you know it. And then another song which is really popular is, I don't want no short something man. So I don't want a man with a short thing. And they're the two most popular songs that get played at these events. And I just think, whoa, that's crazy. Now, understand that the people don't really understand it, and they just think, yeah, it's a good song, I don't want a man with a small, you know, but blimey, that's just crazy, you know. I can't imagine at some event in the UK they put on some Russian rap song where they're swearing like crazy. But in fact, I did see an episode on, I think it was the Late Night Show from like the early 2000s when Tattoo were invited on it, and they were swearing like crazy, and the people in the show had no idea, right, that they were just using crazy amount of Russian profanities in the show. And they had a t-shirt on that said crazy rude words on it, and I guess no one was really aware. The next one, which is very strange for Americans and Westerners, is that Russians use the N-word, and they use the N-word openly. And of course, they know that the N-word is offensive to black people, and a lot of them wouldn't say it when black people are around. However, some of them do. But they don't say it in a way to be racist. They just do it and say it in a way because in Russia, the N-word is slightly different. It's negra, okay? That word is used to describe a black person. And so it's quite common for your Russian friends to say, I've just come back from Paris and there was loads of N-words there. Or, you know, I saw you last night out with your N's. Or, oh, you know, I went to see this football team play and the team's made up of loads of N's. And this is something that is really shocking from a European or American standpoint, because you do not expect people to say this. The only people that use that word are people of colour. And then finally, the thing that Americans don't understand is that in Russia, the majority of people have apartments, and they just can't get their head around it. Why do people live in apartments? Why not choose to live in a house like the houses that I'm walking past in today's video? Why would they like to live in these like ant-hole apartments where, you know, there's 20 floors and apartments everywhere and no garden? Americans can't get their head around it. The difference is that in Russia, people like to be near to all the amenities. In Russia, people walk to places. People generally, you know, perhaps will have one car per family and they'll walk to places, whereas in the US, people will live in the suburbs and you'll drive to work, and so therefore you'll live outside of town. Russian people have dachas where they grow vegetables, or perhaps summer houses in the village that they go to in the summers and at weekends. But typically, they live in the city centre next to all the amenities. So that's the end of today's list of things that Americans find weird about Russia and Russians. Let me know if you agree or disagree with anything that I've put on this list, and let me know of more things that you find weird or strange about Russia and Russians. I'll see you in the next one.